Hi, all. So this week we started looking at grammar in Linguistics 240, and I know you're reading about nouns and pronouns, and the class focuses on grammar. So when looking at nouns, we're talking about is it a count or a non count noun? If it's a count noun, how do we make the plural? How do we teach students categories of non-count nouns? Where do nouns or noun phrases fit within sentences? Um, oh, and use of articles and quantifiers with nouns. So that's all about grammar. But when thinking about it this weekend, I realized that many of you are teachers of young learners who will be building their vocabulary, which we do that too. So we teach reading here too, listening, speaking, and there's a lot of vocabulary building. But I think especially with young learners, when it comes to grammar forms such as nouns or any parts of speech, adjectives, adverbs, verbs, a lot of those will be done through reading with them. So I had made a presentation last year for teachers to teach reading, and a big part of it was vocabulary development and some grammar development. So I'm going to share parts of that with you now. This might be really, so a lot of you are already teachers of young learners, and a lot of what I'm going to say is probably like old news, and you're probably like, I do this every week. Okay, so then just move on with your lives. But any of you who are just getting started teaching or thinking about becoming teachers, maybe this will give you some ideas about teaching vocabulary or different parts of speech in another way other than grammar. Now, I also have a grammar lesson in this presentation that focuses on verb tense, so I'll make another video when we do verb tenses next week and share more of it with you. Okay, so in this presentation, I used a reading for low-level EFL young learners. I actually used a book, a story. The story is Millie's Night Owls, and it's about a young girl who goes over to her grandmother's house, and the house is filled with owls, different wooden owls. And it's a really great story because there's so much descriptive language. Now, for this presentation, I focused on adjectives. I know we're doing nouns this week, but you could also focus on nouns. For this particular one, I focused on adjectives because there was so much description of the owls. As soon as I started reading the story, I'm like, this is a great way to teach young learners adjectives and using description in speaking and in writing. So I took many of the adjectives out of the story and I made flashcards. So some of the flashcards, I wrote the adjective on one side and then put a picture on the other side. So, and then you can put the students in groups and have them either look at the picture and see if they can figure out the word, or look at the word, and then if they're not sure what that word means, they can turn it over and look at the picture. You can also do that with put the word on one side, put the definition on the other side, and put them in groups, have them look at the word, and see if they can figure out together what the definition is of the word. So before you go read the story, introduce them to some of the vocabulary. Again, here I focused on adjectives. So you could do adjectives. If you were learning nouns, one week you could choose a book that has a lot of good nouns to pull out and focus on the vocabulary of nouns in the book. Now, another thing, and again, all of you who are teachers, I'm sure you already do this, are anchor charts. So you can put anchor charts around the room. So make a big poster board and put it in the room and write adjectives on top. And then you can categorize the adjectives. So categorize by description of people or description of animals or words that can describe both people and animals. Color, words that describe physical characteristics versus words that describe personality characteristics. And you can make categories and put the adjectives, the vocabulary words on Post-its. Have the students go put the vocabulary word in the correct categories and then leave that chart up there. And then as you teach more adjectives, or if it's a noun chart, or if it's a verb chart, you can have students add more and more words. And then they can also have their own notebooks with their own anchor charts where they write new vocabulary in their notebooks and have them also put the categories. So they have all these new words in categories. So it's good to do that before you get to the reading. So they know some of the vocabulary before you get to it. So after you introduce some of the new vocabulary, then you can get to the reading. And depending on how low the learners are, there are different things you can do to help teach the vocabulary while you're reading. Obviously, you can point to the illustrations. So this book I chose about the owls had so many good illustrations. There was an illustration for every owl, along with a description, so an adjective to go with it. And as we do other things this semester, I'll add some of the grammar that was put in there. You can also ask the students to point to the illustrations. So they're pointing out what something is while you're reading the words. Ask yes and no and WH questions. So again, this lesson in the beginning focused on adjectives. So you can ask about the adjectives after you've already introduced the students to them. So, is Aunt Millie's house big? What color is Aunt Millie's house? Where are the owls? Where are the owls in the cupboards? When are the owls more active? So we already talked about the students having anchor charts where they can write new vocabulary words that are in the anchor charts in your rooms. Another thing they can do is have their own vocabulary notebooks. The purpose of this is to strengthen their word knowledge and to internalize meaning, and to give them a chance to explain words and definitions in a way that they understand. So, especially for young learners, dictionary definitions can be very difficult to understand and not conversational. So it's harder for them to internalize. Now, often my students ask me, how many times do I have to use a word before I internalize it, before it's in my vocabulary and I can use it? I'm not sure, but I swear I heard research that said about 10 times. So if a student only hears a word once in a book, or a teacher mentions a word once in class, they're not going to internalize it. They're not going to use it. They have to keep repeating it. So again, having them do different types of activities. So you're introducing the vocabulary before you even do the reading. Then you're pointing out the vocabulary in context and with a picture during the reading. Then have them do some post-reading vocabulary work. Whether it be in writing, definitely with discussions and with other students. So then they're not just seeing it, they're not just writing it down, they're also talking about it and using it. The more different ways and the more often they use that vocabulary, the more likely they are to internalize it and learn it. So what's a vocabulary notebook? So as you're reading in class or as they're reading on their own, have the students identify unknown words from the text. Have them have a vocabulary notebook where they write down unknown words, write the sentence with the word in the text, and then the students make their own definitions. You can have them do this together, where they try to guess from context what the word means. If they can't figure it out, you help them, but then they together make a definition that's understandable for them and not a dictionary definition. Another thing they can do is, next to the definition, draw a picture of the word. And again, within their vocabulary notebooks, words can be organized by categories or topics, also parts of speech, whether they be nouns, adjectives, adverbs, verbs. And then you can also have them take it further, have them list synonyms, words that have similar meaning, or antonyms of words. So there are so many ways you can take vocabulary building even further for your students. Okay, now I have 3 ways to teach difficult vocabulary from a text after reading. And again, here you can focus on whatever was in that reading. Here I have a noun. Okay, but whatever type of vocabulary there was in that reading, but you take words out of a reading that are difficult, but you want the students to be able to internalize them and remember them. So one way is through cartoon vocabulary. So what cartoon vocabulary is, it contains the word, how you pronounce it. So here I have the word, it's parliament. Okay, so that word is in Millie's Night Owls. The pronunciation, so there I have the phonetic spelling, parliament. A short definition, so on the picture, so you can have, here I have a picture from within the book, but have the students draw a picture. So they draw what it is, put the word down, put the phonetic spelling, which you're going to have to help them with, a short definition. So what's a parliament? It's a group of owls. And then there's a picture of that. See, you have a group of owls. Have them use it then in a sentence. What appeared to be a parliament going on inside this space? And then draw the picture. So that's a really fun activity where they're drawing, they're defining, they're working on pronunciation, they're writing because they're using that word in a sentence. And then you can have them sit in groups and share all their new words and their drawings together. So you're not just working on vocabulary here, you're really integrating skills, and you're hitting on a lot of different learning styles with this activity too. So that's one way to teach difficult vocabulary. Let's go to another way. Now this is something I'm sure most of you who are teachers who are due, but good old-fashioned vocabulary clusters. So you can put this on the board, you can put this on an anchor chart in your room, you could have your students put this in their vocabulary notebooks. So one of the words in Millie's Night Owls was debate. So on one side you have synonyms, and on another side you have antonyms. So another way to really build your students' vocabulary. And again, they can put these in anchor charts in their vocabulary notebooks. You could do something, an activity to have them use some of the words and share with each other. And the last idea to teach difficult vocabulary is called partner cartoons. So here's an example of a difficult noun that was in Millie's Night Owls. So within the text, 2 lines were, the owl nightlight and lamps lit the den from within. And then before the sun came up again, all of the owls left the great big den. So den is probably a word young learners won't know. So put the students in partners, have them discuss the vocabulary in context. Then each student can draw 4 squares on a sheet of paper or within their vocabulary notebooks. And then each student fills one square with a drawing and one square with a definition. So they're drawing what they believe, what they think a den is, and then they're writing down in the other square their definition based on context. What do they believe the word den means? So both of them are drawing a picture and giving a definition, and then they can share it with each other. And then you can have the class as a whole share their pictures and their definitions and discuss what does this word den mean? And then one little point, again, I'm sure you do this if you teach young learners, but one more thing they can do with this new vocabulary they've learned, as well as to work on their reading comprehension, because this was a text, is a story map. What happened at the beginning of the story? What happened at the middle of the story? What happened at the end of the story? So in that way, you're helping students learn the elements of literature so they can fill in. If you want to read the story a second time as it's read, they can fill in what happened at the beginning, middle, end, or maybe after it's read. Then you can have the students sit in groups and fill in any missing parts, discuss their story maps together and what was missed. Students can walk around, so then you're working those active learners and summarize part of the story with different classmates. You can have higher level students work with maybe lower level students and help them, and see if you can get them to use some of that new vocabulary while they're working on their story map, summarizing what happened in the beginning, middle, and end of that story. So again, you're reinforcing all the vocabulary they've learned while working on reading comprehension and while working on writing and their speaking. So you're integrating skills here again. Okay, so just to summarize, that was just a small vocabulary lesson because I realized that many of you work with young learners and you may not be teaching count versus non-count. What's an article? What's a quantifier? What's a noun phrase? How does it work as the subject or the object in the sentence? You may just teach nouns as vocabulary building, and in doing that and having them use the vocabulary in speaking and in writing, you are working grammar and sentence structure. So just to summarize, I wanted, because we've talked about having students use the grammar or language in as many ways as possible and different learning styles. So I wanted to summarize all the language skills the previous activities worked. So we worked vocabulary building, reading comprehension skills, writing skills in the story maps, a lot of conversational skills because that was a lot of partner and group work. All right, and there's a way to take it further on the bottom by maybe having them do a self-reflection activity, thinking more critically about what happened in the story, and have them share how they connect to the story. So it's a really nice story about, I think I said her grandma, but it was actually her Aunt Millie's house. So you could have them talk about visiting a relative's house. What's different about that house? What do they enjoy in that house? What do they learn while they're there? What do they learn from that person? So having them reflect and critically think and connecting to themselves would be a nice way to end the activity.